If there's one thing we learned in 2023 about the Walt Disney Company, it's that almost everything is either broken or in the process of breaking. And if Disney CEO Bob Iger has his way in 2024, bringing in some new friends to try to repel activist investors like Nelson Peltz from Trian, then probably this year is not going to look a whole lot different than last year. Here we go. Renegade Online. Well, folks, welcome back. Another great day here at Valiant Renegade. It's good to see everybody out there once again. And if you are like one of the many folks watching this video not yet subscribed to this channel, please take a moment and turn that little red subscribe button to gray. Hit that like button, hit that notification bell, share this sucker out on the social medias, and of course, please do leave a comment before you head out the door today. Make sure to join us every Sunday afternoon right here on Valiant Renegade at 6 p.m. Eastern for the live show. Well, it's been one turn of the screw after another in the past year or so since Bob Iger came back in late 2022 after Bob Chapek, the last Disney CEO and also at the same time Bob Iger's successor, only had about 10 months and 3 weeks or so to really try to change direction at Disney. Of course, Bob Iger and folks didn't really care for this, and that was the end of Chapek. But along the way, we got people like Ike Perlmutter from Trian trying to come in during the time that Chapek was CEO to help reshape the board and the direction of Disney, get it back to profitability, shore up some of these many things at Disney that were indeed broken and frankly still are. But that proxy fight from Nelson Peltz ended shortly thereafter when Disney seemed to give them a lot of concessions, things that they were looking for, like promising to reinstate a dividend, get back to fiscal discipline and fiscal responsibility, bring back the old glory days of Disney, make the House of Mouse great again. But since those promises were rendered and Nelson Peltz and company stepped back to see how well Disney would do, things haven't gone to plan, or at least not what Nelson Peltz and Trian and, quite frankly, many Disney stockholders would have hoped for. A disastrous 2023 at the box office, with Disney not only turning in one flop after another, losing nearly $1 billion at the box office over the course of 2023, and then also losing the crown of being the biggest box office share globally. That title officially at the end of 23 went to Universal. Disney's dominance across all metrics seemed to have really declined in the past 12 months. And now, of course, Trian and Nelson Peltz, along with Ike Perlmutter and former Disney CFO Jay Rasulo, trying to get back involved at Disney to help right the ship. But of course, we're going to get the Disney defense pieces, like this one from The Hollywood Reporter. Bob Iger prepares for Ike's pirate ship to fire at Disney. As ousted Marvel mogul Ike Perlmutter and activist investor Nelson Peltz enlist former Disney exec Jay Rasulo in their quest to reshape the studio, the CEO, Bob Iger, faces a somewhat more credible challenge to his reign. "You broke my heart." That's what former Marvel Entertainment chairman and CEO Ike Perlmutter said to Bob Iger, according to the Wall Street Journal, when Iger made it clear in 2015 that he was not going to name veteran Disney executive and Perlmutter favorite Jay Rasulo as his eventual successor. He anointed Tom Staggs instead, and Staggs was out the following year. Being a potential successor was a hazardous duty at Disney, at least in those days. I frankly suspect it still is. Iger's relationship with Perlmutter went sharply downhill from there, and last March, after incrementally stripping Perlmutter of his duties at Marvel, Iger ejected the contentious billionaire from the company altogether. And as we've chronicled many, many times, you can see a very clear delineation of the performance of Marvel before and after Perlmutter's sidelining and then subsequent firing. Basically, once Kevin Feige was given full control of Marvel Studios on his own, carte blanche, we could see what went into pre-production and what came out in theaters, and that was everything that you saw in phases 4 and 5. Almost all of those movies were bombs at the box office. But even before that happened, Ike Perlmutter had backed his friend and Palm Beach neighbor Nelson Peltz in his quest for a seat on the Walt Disney Company board, which Peltz and Perlmutter argued is far too cozy with Bob Iger to be effective. And I agree wholeheartedly. That's one of the biggest problems the Walt Disney Company has. It's not just CEO Bob Iger, but the board at the Walt Disney Company. All of them are basically Bob Iger rubber stamp acolytes. There's really no pushback for anything, or at least big directional changes. And the board, at least by and large, has got to go if there's going to be any major positive changes at the Walt Disney Company, and that includes Bob Iger as well. Peltz dropped that first run at Disney after Iger pledged to slash costs and lay off thousands of employees, but with Disney stock still languishing, Peltz and Perlmutter are back, having added Jay Rasulo to the team. And the goal is to get board seats for both Peltz and Rasulo, and one must suspect eventually to install Rasulo in the CEO job that eluded him years ago. Now, that may or may not be the case, but at the end of the day, I don't know if that would be such a terrible idea to put Jay Rasulo back in there, somebody who's very familiar with Disney and is going to be a bit more business-minded than somebody like Bob Iger, who is purely interested in spending billions of dollars to acquire properties that then go south once Disney acquires them, while at the same time giving creatives almost autonomous control to spend collectively billions more on projects that, at least for the last couple of years, have largely flopped. Says one Disney veteran, Jay has credibility. He's not some Palm Beach crank. He's a very legitimate voice about where Disney was 8 years ago. Ike is angry and eating 3 nights a week at Mar-a-Lago, but Jay showing up on that side is a very significant event. Iger appears to be taking the challenge seriously, enlisting reinforcements of his own. On January 3rd, Disney secured support from the Mason Morfitt-led investment fund ValueAct Capital Management, which has agreed to back its board of director nominees as part of a strategic consulting deal. Meanwhile, shareholder and investment firm Blackwell's Capital may be a wild card in the mix, while a Blackwell's exec stated Wednesday that Peltz should, quote, "in his peacocking," in a nod to backing Iger. The firm also plans to nominate its own board members, Jessica Schell, Craig Hatkoff, and Leah Sullivan, something that holds no appeal for Disney. And that's where the Wall Street Journal article comes in, because this whole deal with ValueAct is the one to watch. The reason being is that Disney has shown in the past that it's actually willing to work with quote-unquote activist investors, provided, of course, that they are willing to effectively give Bob Iger whatever he wants. This is essentially how Bob Iger has managed to just remain in control of Disney, even after he stepped away for about 10 months and 3 weeks, working behind the scenes to get himself back into the job. Disney said it reached a deal with ValueAct, under which the activist would back the company's board of nominees at the coming 2024 shareholder meeting, and Disney would share information and meet with ValueAct. Disney's pact with ValueAct could help inoculate it from the pressure of Peltz's demands for board seats in a contentious proxy season. So it's basically a quid pro quo. Disney is going to hand over inside Disney internal information that would normally just be privy to the board, but let ValueAct in on it to at least afford them a chance to advise and consent, while at the same time, ValueAct in turn is going to promise to just wholeheartedly back whoever Bob Iger throws on the slate for the board of director nominations for the upcoming meeting. Disney in November said it appointed former Morgan Stanley CEO James Gorman and former Sky CEO Jeremy Darroch as new directors weeks after rebuffing Peltz's request to become a director. And Tryon has criticized Disney's board and said in December it wanted to add Peltz as well as former Disney CFO Jay Rasulo to it. So this is Disney yet again playing musical chairs with board seats. If you recall, they eliminated a board seat when they terminated Bob Chapek last year, a seat that Bob Chapek had, because they didn't want an open board seat at that time while Nelson Peltz was making a play for it. Then, once Disney felt the waters cool down a little bit, they added the board seat back and immediately appointed basically what amounts to another Bob Iger lapdog to fill it. Another shareholder, however, Ankara Holdings, said last month that it supports adding Peltz to the Disney board, and in a letter to fellow shareholders, Ankara leaders wrote that Disney is saying the right things about transforming its business, and a, quote, shareholder representative or investor designated directors can help ensure that the changes are carried out effectively. In other words, what Ankara is saying is that, sure, what Disney and Bob Iger is saying sounds really nice, but we frankly don't trust that they'll actually do it. But back to the article from The Hollywood Reporter, Rasulo was just the sort of tough executive that Perlmutter would favor. One Disney veteran describes him as effective, but also as, quote, sort of a blunt instrument, as he made a tough budget cut and sometimes referred to other executives as, quote, children playing at business. Wonder if he had a picture of Iger on the wall when he said that. Disney Insider, however, rolls his eyes at Jay Rasulo's claim that he is jumping into the fray out of love for the company. Quote from the Insider, if that was really his motive, he wouldn't try to engage in a fight along with Nelson frigging Peltz and Ike Perlmutter, he says. Quote, Ike wants retribution and Peltz wants a fast buck. They don't give a shit about the company. It's a pretty ridiculous statement considering how long Jay Rasulo was there. As a reminder, he came to Disney more than a decade before Bob Iger did. Perlmutter's longtime attorney, however, John Tiritzon, bristles at that. Quote, it's an absurd suggestion to make, he says. Perlmutter has got, I don't know, how many billions of dollars tied up in Disney. He is not going to play a revenge game with the majority of his personal wealth. Now, of course, The Hollywood Reporter goes on to lament Ike Perlmutter's historical reclusiveness and how Bob Iger was such a deft smoothie when it came to media and being the face of Disney. And of course, it wouldn't be a California-based article if they didn't mention the fact of the close relationship between Ike Perlmutter, Nelson Peltz, and former President Donald Trump. And as I've mentioned many times, I would argue that may be the greatest sin of Ike Perlmutter and Nelson Peltz insofar as Bob Iger and many members of the Disney board are concerned. And frankly, that goes for Jay Rasulo as well. But at the end of the day, we have to ask ourselves, is Disney really going to get any better with the current leadership? Maybe what we need is a few pirates to show up like this and really rustle the feathers at the Walt Disney Company boardroom. It's a simple question of this. Is the man, Bob Iger, and the board of directors that he has very carefully put in place to support his vision of Disney, the people that actually got it to this point over years of, frankly, mismanagement, are they really the folks that are capable of righting the ship? Or do we need some fresh blood in there to actually make sure that the ship does indeed turn? And the last question that a lot of Disney investors and shareholders might be asking themselves today is that, is this in fact still the Walt Disney Company? Or is it Bob Iger Incorporated? Make sure you're subscribed to Valiant Renegade and join us every Sunday at 6 p.m. Eastern for the live show.